Captain Alex Mercer sat in cell block 7 of the Kepler Maximum Security Detention Facility, contemplating the irony that saving someone's life had become the worst decision of his career. The cell's energy barriers hummed with the kind of advanced technology that could contain beings whose natural abilities included teleportation, molecular manipulation, and creative interpretations of the laws of physics, which seemed like overkill for imprisoning a human diplomatic courier whose most dangerous skill was an unfortunate tendency toward moral decision-making. Day 127, he said to his cell's recording system, maintaining the log that had become his primary form of entertainment and evidence that solitary confinement hadn't yet driven him completely insane. Still imprisoned for the crime of preventing someone from being murdered in front of me. Still waiting for someone to explain how "thou shalt not kill" became "thou shalt not prevent killing if it violates diplomatic protocols." The recording system didn't respond, which Alex considered appropriate since it was probably designed for inmates confessing to actual crimes rather than reflecting on the philosophical implications of interstellar justice. His cell was equipped with everything necessary for long-term confinement: automated meal delivery, exercise equipment, educational programs, and entertainment systems that provided access to thousands of years of galactic literature and cultural content. Everything except the one thing he actually wanted: contact with the person whose life he'd saved. Lyra Veltar. The name had become both his greatest satisfaction and his deepest regret, representing the moment when his diplomatic training had collided with basic human decency and decency had won. She'd been under attack by raiders in neutral space, her small transport vessel disabled and her life in immediate danger, and Alex had been carrying diplomatic credentials that explicitly forbade interference with consortium citizens under any circumstances. He'd violated those orders without hesitation, using his courier ship's defensive systems to drive off the raiders and his emergency medical training to stabilize Lyra's injuries. For approximately 18 minutes, he'd been a hero rescuing an innocent person from certain death. For the 6 months since then, he'd been a diplomatic prisoner serving as a sacrificial offering to maintain peace between human and consortium territories. The thing about heroic gestures, Alex continued his log entry, is that they feel great right up until the point where you realize that saving someone's life can be classified as an act of war if you do it in the wrong star system with the wrong diplomatic credentials. His cell's communication system chimed with the melodic tone that indicated incoming official correspondence, which was unusual since his legal status as a diplomatic prisoner meant that all communication had to be approved by 3 different governmental agencies. Alex activated the message display, expecting another legal document explaining why his appeals had been denied or his sentence had been extended. Instead, he found himself looking at a formal diplomatic transmission from the Veltar Consortium, bearing official seals and transmitted through channels that indicated it had been approved at the highest levels of consortium government. The message was brief, formal, and devastating in its implications. To Captain Alex Mercer, Diplomatic Prisoner 7 Delta Prime. From Veltar Consortium Diplomatic Authority. Resolution of Incident 2387 Delta. The Consortium acknowledges Captain Mercer's intervention in the attack upon citizen Lyra Veltar. While such intervention violated established non-interference protocols, the Consortium recognizes that Captain Mercer's actions were motivated by humanitarian concern rather than political aggression. However, the preservation of interstellar diplomatic stability requires that protocol violations be addressed regardless of motivation. Citizen Veltar has been questioned regarding the incident and found to be without fault in the matter. Captain Mercer's continued incarceration serves the interests of diplomatic stability and should not be construed as punishment but as necessary sacrifice for the greater good of interstellar peace. Alex read the message twice, parsing the diplomatic language and understanding its implications. Lyra was safe, officially cleared of any wrongdoing, and presumably returned to her normal life within consortium space. His imprisonment was permanent, necessary for maintaining the political balance that kept multiple species from engaging in the kind of warfare that could destroy civilizations. Well, he said to his cell's recording system, at least someone got a happy ending out of this situation. The irony wasn't lost on him that his successful rescue mission had achieved exactly what he'd intended. Lyra was alive, safe, and free to continue her life, while simultaneously destroying his own future in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Diplomatic law was apparently more complex than human morality, and the intersection of the two created situations where doing the right thing became a crime against interstellar stability. His contemplation was interrupted by another communication alert, this one indicating an incoming personal message rather than official correspondence. Alex activated the display, curious about who might be authorized to send him personal communications given the restrictions on his prisoner status. The message was audio only, transmitted through encrypted channels that suggested it had been routed through multiple security protocols to reach him. The voice that emerged from his cell's speakers was familiar, carrying the melodic accent that had stayed with him through 6 months of isolation. "Alex," Lyra's voice said, and he felt something tighten in his chest at hearing her speak his name. "I don't know if this message will reach you, or if it will reach you without being monitored, but I need you to know something important." Alex moved closer to the communication array, understanding that he was probably violating prison regulations by listening to an unauthorized message but finding that he no longer cared about regulations that had already cost him everything. "I know what they told you about me being questioned and cleared," Lyra continued, her voice carrying emotions that formal diplomatic communications couldn't convey. "What they didn't tell you is that being cleared doesn't mean being free. What they didn't tell you is that saving my life has cost you everything, while I've been forced to pretend that your sacrifice doesn't matter." The message paused, and Alex could hear background sounds that suggested Lyra was transmitting from somewhere that wasn't entirely secure. When her voice returned, it carried a determination that made him remember why he'd been willing to risk everything to save her. "Alex, they've told me that forgetting you is the price of my freedom, that maintaining contact with you would be considered evidence of contamination by alien influences. They've told me that your imprisonment is necessary for diplomatic stability, and that accepting it is my duty as a consortium citizen." Another pause, longer this time, filled with the kind of silence that suggested someone was making a decision that would change everything. "I'm calling to tell you that I reject their offer," Lyra said, her voice now carrying the clarity of someone who had chosen a course of action despite understanding its consequences. "I reject the suggestion that your sacrifice should be forgotten. I reject the idea that saving my life was a crime deserving punishment. And I reject the notion that diplomatic stability is more important than justice." Alex felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced since his arrest, hope mixed with concern as he understood that Lyra was risking everything to maintain contact with him. "Alex," Lyra said, her voice now carrying a note of affection that made 6 months of isolation suddenly seem like preparation rather than punishment, "they imprisoned you for breaking their rules to save me. I'm going to break every rule they have to save you." The message ended, leaving Alex staring at the communication display and understanding that his story wasn't over. Somewhere in consortium space, the person whose life he'd saved was planning to risk everything to return the favor, and the thought of it terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Day 127, supplemental entry, Alex said to his recording system, feeling something approaching optimism for the first time since his imprisonment began. "Apparently, heroic gestures are contagious. I just hope Lyra understands what she's getting herself into." The recording system remained silent, but Alex noticed that the energy barriers around his cell seemed to hum with slightly different harmonics, as if the prison security systems were responding to changes in the facility's status that hadn't been announced to the prisoners. Something was shifting in the carefully maintained balance of interstellar diplomacy, and Alex had the growing suspicion that his quiet imprisonment was about to become significantly more complicated. Outside his cell, Kepler Maximum Security Detention Facility continued its efficient operation of containing the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, unaware that its most cooperative prisoner had just received a message that would challenge every assumption about security, loyalty, and the lengths to which someone would go to repay an act of courage. Alex settled back in his cell, feeling anticipation replace resignation as he understood that the most interesting part of his story was about to begin. Lyra Veltar stood in the archives of the Consortium Central Library, surrounded by data crystals containing thousands of years of legal precedents, security protocols, and engineering specifications, trying to transform herself from a compliant citizen into an interstellar criminal through the application of systematic research. The irony wasn't lost on her that her people's obsession with documentation and record-keeping was providing her with everything she needed to plan the most spectacular violation of consortium law in their recorded history. Criminal methodology, subsection 47C, prison infiltration techniques, she murmured to herself, activating a data crystal that contained case studies of every major prison break in galactic history. I never thought my doctoral research skills would be applicable to felony planning, but apparently academic thoroughness translates well to illegal activities. The past 3 weeks had been an education in how quickly a life could be dismantled when someone chose conscience over compliance. Her family's status within consortium society had suffered immediate damage when her association with Alex became public knowledge. Her research position at the Diplomatic Institute had been temporarily suspended pending cultural contamination assessment. Her social connections had evaporated as friends decided that association with someone under government scrutiny was too risky for their own careers. Most importantly, her freedom of movement had been restricted through protective monitoring protocols that ensured she understood the consequences of maintaining contact with alien influences. The consortium's approach to protecting her from contamination involved making her life sufficiently miserable that she would choose to forget Alex entirely rather than continue suffering for the connection. Kepler Maximum Security Detention Facility, Lyra said, accessing architectural plans and security specifications for the prison that held Alex. Automated defense systems, psionic barriers, guards trained in containing beings with abilities that exceed normal physical limitations. Designed to hold creatures that can teleport through solid matter and manipulate reality with their thoughts. She studied the facility's specifications with the methodical attention she'd once applied to her research on interspecies diplomatic protocols, understanding that her academic background was providing her with analytical skills that most criminals probably lacked. The prison's security was impressive, comprehensive, and based on the assumption that threats would come from beings with supernatural abilities rather than from someone with legitimate access credentials and a thorough understanding of bureaucratic procedures. Security weakness identification, Lyra continued her research, pulling up files on the facility's operational procedures. The system is designed to prevent escape by containing dangerous entities within the facility. But it assumes that infiltration attempts will come from beings using exotic abilities rather than from someone who can simply walk through the front door with appropriate authorization. The plan taking shape in her mind was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to break into the prison, she would arrange to be invited in as an official diplomatic observer, then use her legitimate access to accomplish illegitimate rescue objectives. The consortium's diplomatic corps maintained inspection rights at various interstellar detention facilities, and Lyra's background in diplomatic research made her a logical candidate for such assignments. Diplomatic observer protocols, she said, accessing the procedures that governed official prison inspections. Standard authorization includes access to prisoner interview facilities, security system briefings, and accompanied tours of high-security areas. Duration typically ranges from 3 to 7 days depending on facility complexity and inspection scope. The challenge wouldn't be gaining access to the prison, it would be acquiring the equipment necessary to extract Alex while avoiding detection by security systems designed to monitor every biological, electromagnetic, and quantum signature within the facility. Her research led her into databases she'd never accessed before, containing specifications for technology that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal applications. Personal defense systems, Lyra read from a technical manual that probably shouldn't have been available through academic channels. Category 7 neural disruptors, quantum phase modulators, emergency teleportation devices. Available through specialized diplomatic supply vendors for personnel assigned to high-risk interspecies contact scenarios. She spent the next several hours discovering that the consortium's diplomatic supply system included equipment that could generously be described as aggressive negotiation tools, and more accurately described as weapons that violate most known treaties. The ordering process required documentation of assignment to hazardous duty zones, but Lyra's research background had taught her how to navigate bureaucratic requirements with creative interpretation of regulatory language. Assignment justification, Research into criminal detention methodologies requires direct observation of high-security facilities and potential interaction with psychologically unstable subjects, she dictated to the procurement system, feeling proud of her ability to make prison break preparation sound like legitimate academic research. Equipment request. Standard diplomatic protection suite including personal defense systems, communication jamming devices, and emergency extraction tools. The procurement system accepted her request with the efficiency of automated bureaucracy, scheduling delivery of enough illegal technology to outfit a small military unit while classifying it as routine diplomatic supplies. Lyra marveled at how easy it was to acquire weapons of mass destruction when you had the appropriate academic credentials and the ability to write convincing research proposals. Her preparation continued with physical conditioning that transformed her library research into practical skills. The consortium's diplomatic training programs included courses on personal security, emergency procedures, and survival techniques that were designed to prepare diplomats for service in dangerous territories. Lyra approached this training with the intensity of someone whose life might depend on the ability to move quickly through hostile environments. Combat applications of diplomatic immunity, she said during a training session that was teaching her to use formal negotiation techniques as cover for reconnaissance activities. Fascinating how many aggressive actions can be justified as cultural research when you have the appropriate documentation. The most challenging aspect of her preparation wasn't technical or physical, it was psychological. The consortium had raised her to believe that individual desires should be subordinated to social stability, that breaking rules was evidence of character failure, and that maintaining proper relationships with other species required strict adherence to established protocols. Planning to violate every principle her culture had taught her required her to fundamentally reimagine her understanding of duty and loyalty. Personal log, day 23 of preparation, she said to her private recording system, documenting her transformation with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to academic research. I've learned to acquire illegal weapons through diplomatic channels, gained access to restricted prison facilities through bureaucratic manipulation, and developed combat skills through creative interpretation of cultural training programs. I'm either becoming an incredibly efficient criminal or discovering that the difference between legitimate authority and organized crime is primarily a matter of paperwork. Her research into Alex's situation had revealed the broader implications of his imprisonment, showing her how frequently moral courage was sacrificed for political expediency throughout galactic civilization. His case wasn't unique, it was representative of a system that punished individuals for refusing to ignore injustice when that injustice served diplomatic purposes. Alex saved my life because he believed saving lives was more important than following orders, Lyra said, reviewing the files that documented his arrest and imprisonment. The least I can do is save his life because I believe keeping promises is more important than avoiding consequences. The final phase of her preparation involved establishing communication protocols that would allow her to coordinate with Alex during the rescue without alerting prison security to their collaboration. This required her to learn about clandestine communication techniques that definitely weren't covered in standard diplomatic training. Quantum encrypted personal communication system, she said, assembling a device that looked like standard diplomatic equipment but functioned as an untraceable communication array. Technically legal under diplomatic immunity protocols, practically useful for coordinating illegal activities. I'm beginning to understand why the consortium is so concerned about cultural contamination. Spending time with humans is teaching me to be remarkably creative about interpreting regulations. 3 weeks after receiving authorization for her prison inspection assignment, Lyra stood in her quarters surrounded by equipment that could accomplish either the most thorough diplomatic evaluation in consortium history or the most audacious prison break in galactic records. Her transformation from compliant citizen to interstellar criminal was complete, motivated by gratitude, sustained by determination, and justified by the understanding that some loyalties transcend legal obligations. Tomorrow I begin the inspection of Kepler Maximum Security Detention Facility, she said to her recording system, feeling anticipation rather than fear about the mission that would either free Alex or destroy both their lives. I'm either about to prove that love can overcome any obstacle, or demonstrate that good intentions combined with illegal weapons create spectacular disasters. She paused, considering the implications of what she was about to attempt, then smiled with the confidence of someone who had spent 3 weeks learning that rules existed to be broken by people with sufficient determination and appropriate equipment. Either way, she concluded, it's going to be educational. Lyra's arrival at Kepler Maximum Security Detention Facility was met with the kind of professional courtesy reserved for high-ranking diplomatic personnel, which made her feel like a fraud right up until she remembered that she was carrying enough concealed weapons to level a small city and was planning to commit what would probably be classified as an act of war against multiple governments. The guards who escorted her through the facility's entrance protocols were efficient, respectful, and completely unaware that their diplomatic guest was conducting detailed reconnaissance for the most audacious prison break in galactic history. "Welcome to Kepler Maximum Security, Diplomatic Observer Veltar," said Warden Harrison, a career corrections official whose demeanor suggested someone who had seen enough dangerous prisoners to develop healthy respect for beings whose abilities exceeded normal limitations. "We appreciate the consortium's interest in our operations and look forward to your evaluation of our interspecies detention protocols." "Thank you, Warden," Lyra replied, activating recording equipment that was simultaneously documenting legitimate observations and scanning for security vulnerabilities. The consortium values transparency in correctional methodologies, particularly regarding the treatment of prisoners whose cases involve diplomatic complexities. The facility tour began with standard security briefings that provided Lyra with detailed information about containment systems, guard rotations, and emergency procedures. She listened with the attentiveness of someone conducting academic research while mentally cataloging everything that would be useful for infiltration planning. The irony of using official prison orientation to plan a prison break wasn't lost on her, though she maintained diplomatic composure throughout the presentations. "Our automated defense systems operate on multiple redundancy principles," explained Chief Security Officer Martinez, indicating displays that showed the facility's comprehensive monitoring networks. "Psionic barriers prevent telepathic interference, quantum field disruptors block phase-shifting abilities, and gravitational stabilizers prevent manipulation of local spacetime conditions." "Impressive," Lyra said, noting that the security systems were designed to counter abilities that exceeded conventional physics but weren't optimized to detect conventional weapons that had been disguised as diplomatic equipment. "How do these systems respond to standard electromagnetic signatures?" "Standard signatures are filtered through baseline comparison matrices," Martinez replied, unknowingly providing Lyra with the information she needed to ensure her concealed equipment wouldn't trigger automated alarms. "Anything within normal parameters for the species present is classified as non-threatening and ignored by the monitoring systems." The tour continued through various sections of the facility, with Lyra maintaining professional interest while assessing guard positions, corridor layouts, and potential escape routes. Her diplomatic immunity provided her with access to areas that would normally be restricted, and her academic background gave her the framework for asking detailed questions without seeming suspicious. "I'd like to conduct interviews with several prisoners to evaluate the effectiveness of your rehabilitation programs," Lyra said as they approached the high-security cell blocks. "Particularly prisoners whose cases involve diplomatic complications or interspecies legal issues." "Of course," Warden Harrison agreed. "We've prepared a list of prisoners whose cases might be relevant to your evaluation. Though I should mention that one of them is the human diplomatic prisoner whose case created some controversy within consortium circles." "Captain Alex Mercer," Lyra said, maintaining diplomatic neutrality despite the surge of anticipation she felt at being so close to her objective. "His case presents interesting questions about the intersection of moral imperative and diplomatic protocol." "Indeed," the warden agreed. "He's been a model prisoner, though his situation is unusual given that his crime was essentially an act of humanitarian intervention rather than traditional criminal activity." The interview facility was designed to provide secure communication between prisoners and authorized visitors while maintaining comprehensive monitoring of all interactions. Lyra was escorted to a consultation room equipped with force fields, recording systems, and emergency protocols that could contain violent encounters between species with radically different capabilities. When Alex was brought into the interview room, Lyra felt the full impact of seeing him again after 6 months of separation. He looked thinner, more tired, but his eyes still held the same integrity that had motivated him to risk everything to save her life. Their reunion was constrained by the formal requirements of a diplomatic interview, but underneath the professional courtesy was the emotional intensity of two people who had found each other again despite impossible circumstances. "Captain Mercer," Lyra said, activating her recording equipment while simultaneously initializing the quantum-encrypted communication device hidden within her diplomatic gear. "I'm here to evaluate the conditions of your incarceration as part of a consortium review of interspecies detention protocols." "I appreciate the consortium's interest," Alex replied, understanding immediately that their conversation was being monitored while recognizing the subtle technological signatures that indicated secure communication capability. "Though I should point out that my treatment here has been entirely professional and appropriate." Their interview proceeded on two levels: a formal diplomatic evaluation that satisfied prison monitoring requirements, and a clandestine communication exchange that allowed them to coordinate escape plans without alerting security systems. Lyra's preparation had included training in multi-layered conversation techniques that allowed her to conduct official business while simultaneously planning illegal activities. The facility's security systems appear comprehensive, Lyra observed through official channels while transmitting detailed infiltration plans through encrypted frequencies. "I trust you've had no difficulties with the automated containment protocols." "The systems function exactly as designed," Alex replied, acknowledging both her official question and her technical specifications for disabling the containment fields around his cell. "Though I've noticed some interesting behavioral patterns in the automated routines that might be worth documenting." Their conversation continued for an hour, with Lyra gathering information for her official report while establishing the precise timing and coordination needed for Alex's extraction. The prison's interview protocols allowed for extended consultation periods, giving them sufficient time to plan every detail of the rescue operation. "I believe I have enough information for my preliminary evaluation," Lyra said as their interview concluded, feeling confident that they'd covered every aspect of the escape plan without triggering security attention. "I'll be continuing my facility assessment for several more days before submitting my final report." "Thank you for your thoroughness," Alex replied, understanding that their next contact would be under very different circumstances. "I hope your evaluation provides valuable insights for improving interspecies correctional methodologies." As Alex was escorted back to his cell, Lyra remained in the interview facility to complete her documentation while actually finalizing preparations for the rescue operation. Her equipment had successfully infiltrated the prison's security networks. Her cover as a diplomatic observer provided her with continued access to restricted areas, and her coordination with Alex ensured that he would be ready when the extraction began. "Phase 1 complete," she murmured to her encrypted communication system, transmitting status updates to equipment she'd pre-positioned outside the facility. "Target located, security protocols mapped, extraction timeline established. Beginning Phase 2 implementation." The second phase of her operation involved using her remaining time as a diplomatic observer to disable key security systems while maintaining the appearance of conducting routine evaluations. Her academic training in research methodology proved invaluable for systematic sabotage, as she approached each security vulnerability with the thoroughness of someone documenting experimental procedures. "Gravitational stabilizer maintenance access," she said, examining the facility's most sophisticated containment system while installing modifications that would create calculated failures during the escape attempt. "Fascinating how complex security systems become vulnerable when someone with appropriate access credentials takes interest in their operational specifications." Her sabotage was subtle, designed to create system failures that would appear to be routine maintenance issues rather than deliberate interference. Years of academic research had taught her to achieve objectives through patient, methodical work that avoided attracting attention to the overall pattern of her activities. As her official inspection period neared its conclusion, Lyra prepared for the most dangerous phase of her mission, the actual extraction of Alex from a facility designed to contain beings whose abilities exceeded normal physical limitations. Her preparation had been thorough, her planning had been comprehensive, but the success of the operation would ultimately depend on their ability to work together under pressure. Final phase preparation, she transmitted to Alex through their encrypted communication channel. "Extraction begins at 0300 facility time. Are you ready?" Ready, Alex replied, understanding that their next few hours would determine whether her sacrifice would free them both or destroy them together. Lyra, thank you. Thank me when we're free, Lyra said, feeling anticipation rather than fear about the challenge ahead. After all, you started this by breaking rules to save me. I'm just returning the favor. As facility lighting shifted to night cycle illumination, Lyra began the final preparations for an operation that would either establish new precedents for diplomatic immunity or create the most spectacular failure in prison break history. Either way, she was committed to proving that some loyalties were worth any risk. The extraction began at exactly 0300 facility time when Lyra's carefully placed modifications to the gravitational stabilization system created what appeared to be a routine maintenance alert that required immediate attention from technical staff. The beauty of her sabotage was its subtlety. Instead of dramatic explosions or obvious system failures, she'd created problems that demanded investigation by personnel who would be too focused on technical diagnostics to notice that their diplomatic observer was no longer conducting routine evaluations. Gravitational fluctuation in Cell Block 7 announced the facility's automated systems, triggering maintenance protocols that drew guards away from Alex's section while Lyra made her way through corridors she'd mapped during 3 days of official tours. Her diplomatic credentials provided her with access to restricted areas, and her equipment allowed her to disable security systems without triggering the kind of alarms that would bring the entire facility's defensive capabilities to bear on her location. Alex felt the change in his cell's containment field before the automated systems announced it, understanding that Lyra's operation was beginning with the precision and thoroughness he'd expected from someone who approached prison breaks with academic methodology. The energy barriers that had confined him for 6 months flickered and stabilized at reduced power levels, creating gaps that would allow escape without completely failing in ways that would trigger emergency lockdown procedures. Phase 2 implementation successful, Lyra's voice came through the quantum-encrypted communication device Alex had concealed in his cell's entertainment system. Containment field reduced to 40% standard output. Emergency maintenance protocols have redirected security attention to secondary areas. You have approximately 12 minutes to reach extraction point 7. Acknowledged, Alex replied, using tools Lyra had smuggled to him during their interview to complete the process of disabling his cell's remaining security measures. Beginning movement to extraction point. What's your status? Proceeding to Security Junction 15 to disable monitoring systems for Corridor 7 Delta, Lyra reported, her voice carrying the calm efficiency of someone executing a plan that had been researched, tested, and optimized for maximum effectiveness. Minor complications with guard rotation schedules, but nothing outside acceptable parameters. Alex emerged from his cell into corridors that felt different after 6 months of confinement, understanding that his freedom was both a return to mobility and the beginning of a life as a fugitive from interstellar justice. The facility's night lighting provided enough illumination for navigation while creating shadows that concealed his movement from automated monitoring systems that Lyra had systematically compromised. Security Junction 15 reached, Lyra transmitted as Alex made his way through the facility's maze of corridors toward their planned rendezvous point. Monitoring systems offline for Corridors 7 Delta through 9 Charlie. You should have clear passage to Extraction Point 7. Complications, Alex reported as he encountered a guard patrol that wasn't supposed to be in his section according to Lyra's intelligence. Unscheduled security sweep in progress. 2 guards, standard equipment, conducting routine inspection that's putting them directly in my path. Can you avoid them? Alex assessed the situation, understanding that direct confrontation would trigger alarms that would bring the facility's full security capabilities into action against both of them. Negative. Corridor configuration doesn't allow alternate routes. I need a distraction. Stand by, Lyra said, and Alex could hear the sound of her equipment activating systems she'd accessed during her facility evaluation. Initiating secondary maintenance alert in Section 12. Guards should be redirected in approximately 30 seconds. The facility's automated systems announced a new maintenance emergency in the opposite direction from Alex's location, and he watched the guard patrol receive orders to investigate the developing situation. As they moved away from his position, Alex resumed his movement toward the extraction point with growing appreciation for Lyra's ability to manipulate complex systems through careful preparation and precise timing. Extraction Point 7 reached, Alex reported as he arrived at a maintenance access area that Lyra had identified as their best route out of the facility. Standing by for final phase implementation. Final phase beginning now, Lyra replied, and Alex could hear the distinctive sound of advanced technology being activated in ways that definitely violated the terms of diplomatic immunity. Initiating electromagnetic pulse to disable remaining security systems. You'll have approximately 8 minutes of complete surveillance blackout before backup systems restore monitoring capability. The electromagnetic pulse that swept through the facility was precisely calibrated to disable security electronics without affecting life support or emergency systems, demonstrating Lyra's understanding of the difference between effective sabotage and reckless destruction. Alex felt the change as automated systems throughout the facility shifted to backup protocols, creating a window of opportunity that Lyra had calculated to the second. Moving to final extraction point, Alex said, following the route Lyra had planned through maintenance areas and service corridors that led to the facility's exterior. Where are you? Already at the final extraction point, Lyra replied, and Alex realized she was somewhere outside the facility with transportation and equipment necessary for their escape. Emergency teleportation beacon is active. When you reach coordinates 247, north, 15, activate the personal transport device I provided during our interview. Alex found the coordinates Lyra had specified, a seemingly empty area of the facility's outer perimeter that showed no signs of security monitoring or defensive systems. He activated the transport device she'd given him, feeling the familiar disorientation of quantum teleportation as the technology moved him from the prison to a location several kilometers away where Lyra waited with a ship that looked nothing like standard consortium diplomatic vessels. Welcome to freedom, Lyra said as Alex materialized beside her ship, her smile carrying the satisfaction of someone who had successfully executed the most complex operation of her life. Though I should mention that our freedom comes with some significant complications. Such as the fact that we're now fugitives from both human and consortium justice, Lyra said, leading him toward the ship's entrance. Breaking you out of prison required me to violate approximately 47 different interstellar laws, compromise my diplomatic immunity, and essentially declare war on the legal systems of 3 different species. Alex looked at the ship that would carry them away from the prison where he'd spent 6 months, understanding that Lyra had sacrificed everything she'd ever known to repay his act of conscience. Lyra, you've destroyed your life to save mine. Why? Because you destroyed your life to save mine, she replied simply. And because some things are more important than following rules that punish people for doing the right thing. Their escape ship lifted off as alarms began sounding at Kepler Maximum Security Detention Facility, carrying them away from their old lives toward an uncertain future as fugitives who had chosen each other over the approval of their respective governments. The ship's destination was neutral territory where they might have a chance of survival, but more importantly, it was carrying them toward the opportunity to build a relationship based on choice rather than obligation. So what happens now? Alex asked as they achieved safe distance from the prison and began their journey toward whatever freedom looked like for 2 people who had rejected the legal systems that governed galactic civilization. Now we find out if the connection we made during our first meeting can survive the reality of life as interstellar criminals, Lyra said, settling into the pilot seat of a ship equipped with technology that definitely hadn't come through legitimate diplomatic channels. Though I should mention that being on the run together is probably going to be more challenging than being separated by prison walls. Probably, Alex agreed, watching stars shift outside their ship's viewports as they traveled toward an uncertain future. But at least we'll be facing those challenges together. Together, Lyra repeated, and Alex could hear in her voice the same determination that had motivated her to risk everything for his freedom. After all, we've both proven that we're willing to break every rule for each other. Compared to that, figuring out how to be happy fugitives should be relatively simple. 6 months later, Alex and Lyra stood in the offices of the Neutral Territory Legal Aid Society, an organization they'd established to provide assistance to prisoners of conscience and diplomatic refugees throughout the galaxy. Their personal relationship had survived the transition from rescue mission to practical partnership, strengthened by shared experiences and the discovery that their different backgrounds created complementary capabilities rather than irreconcilable differences. Case File 247, Human Diplomat Imprisoned for Violating Non-Interference Directive to Prevent Murder, Lyra read from their organization's current caseload. Recommended action, legal challenge to diplomatic immunity limitations, public awareness campaign regarding moral courage versus political expediency, and direct intervention if legal approaches prove insufficient. Direct intervention. Alex asked with amusement, understanding that their organization had developed a reputation for creative approaches to interstellar justice that sometimes resembled their own escape from prison. Sometimes the only way to fix broken systems is to break them more systematically, Lyra said with the confidence of someone who had learned that rules existed to serve justice rather than replace it. After all, we've proven that the right people with sufficient determination can accomplish impossible things. Even when those impossible things involve violating multiple interstellar laws. Especially then, Lyra said, settling into her chair with the satisfaction of someone who had found work that made the universe slightly more just. Besides, diplomatic immunity is surprisingly useful for activities that exist in the gray areas between legal and illegal. Alex smiled, understanding that their love story had become the foundation for work that challenged the systems that sacrificed individual conscience for political convenience. They'd learned that freedom wasn't just escape from imprisonment, it was the ability to live according to principles that transcended legal obligations. Ready for our next case? Lyra asked, pulling up files for another prisoner whose crime had been refusing to ignore injustice when ignoring it would have been politically convenient. Always, Alex replied, understanding that they'd found something worth more than either of their individual freedoms, a partnership that made impossible rescues feel like routine work, and a love that had grown stronger through shared commitment to principles that exceeded legal requirements. After all, they'd proven that some rules were meant to be broken by people who understood that justice was more important than stability, and that some loves were worth any risk.